What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands History countdown, and today I'm going to be going over what I think are some of the worst shields in Borderlands history. Now, before we start, this video is going to be including a combination of disappointing as well as truly awful shields together, and with this in mind, it's worth mentioning that some of these actually do have some redeeming qualities. Otherwise, and as always, feel free to leave comments on what you think some of the worst shields are throughout Borderlands history in the comment section below. However, let's go ahead and get started with number 10, and that is going to be the Ironclad from Borderlands 1. So the Ironclad isn't necessarily terrible, as it does have some notable attributes like being one of 3 pearlescent shields, and is also capable of sporting the highest possible capacity of any shield in Borderlands 1. While this sounds great on paper, the primary issue with the Ironclad is it's not that much better than other similar pangolin shields in terms of capacity. As you can see by comparing these item cards of these two different shields, you'll notice that they are extremely close in terms of capacity, with the Ironclad ever so slightly edging out a more common shield by about 100 to 200 capacity or so. Ultimately, I suppose it's definitely not the worst shield in the entire series, but the Ironclad does leave something to be desired. If you do want it though, it drops from badass engineers, badass defenders, and badass infantry. And like other pearlescents, you can receive it from Chromorax or Crimson Lance weapon chests. Number 9. Adaptive shields from Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel. This is going to exhibit bias on my part, but I have to be honest and say that I have never really liked adaptive shields. While I will admit that they tend to be great for dealing with damage over time effects, the health bonuses that they can provide can prove to be useful, and there are some great ones like the pre-sequel's Haymaker or Borderlands 2's Blockade thanks to their unique abilities, I've just never really liked adaptive shields due to the fact that they have to take damage before activating the resistances. This isn't usually a problem if you're dealing with an attack that's already weak, but sustained attacks from like rocket launchers or other high damage sources will utterly wreck the shield before the shield itself can adapt. Overall, and despite my bias, don't write all of these off, as certain models like the Blockade, Haymaker, and even as much as I don't like adaptive shields, the evolution can be quite decent. Just don't expect some of the more typical models to save you from a few bandits wielding rocket launchers. Number 8. The Sponge Shield from Borderlands 2. As far as absorption shields are concerned, I suppose the Sponge isn't the worst, but I would definitely say it leaves the most to be desired due to its rarity. I also think that when compared to other legendary absorption shields, the Sponge definitely comes up short, and perhaps the most notable example of this is when the Sponge is compared to the Sham. The Sham is capable of an astounding 94% absorb chance, while the Sponge at best is capable of 54%. While I suppose it's true that you get more shield capacity in return, I'd honestly rather have the higher absorb chance over having the improved shield capacity, as the higher absorb chance is more useful when dealing with enemy bullets. Even when compared to the Transformer, which is actually slightly worse than the Sponge in terms of absorption chance, the Sponge underperforms due to its inability to absorb and recharge from shock damage like the Transformer does. After all, if you can almost instantly recharge your shield via shock damage and get some of the improved capacity that the Sponge has, why would you waste the Seraph Crystals on the Sponge? If you would like to waste your Seraph Crystals though, the Sponge can be acquired from the Seraph vendor located in the Badass Crater of Badassitude in the Torx campaign of Carnage DLC. Number 7. The Pun-chee Shield from Borderlands 2. I've always wondered if the Pun-chee was some sort of practical joke on the behalf of the developers. Like you might distinguish between an employer, who is someone who employs, and the employee, who is someone that gets employed, the Pun-chee is a shield in which the player gets punched, or just the crap beaten out of them if they choose to use it. The funny thing though is that the Pun-chee actually has better stats than most other unique roid shields. However, I think the issue is that other unique roid shields tend to have better use cases in comparison based on some of their unique attributes. As a great example, the Order isn't capable of quite as high roid damage as the Pun-chee, but has the benefit of pairing well with the Law Pistol, which has 100% melee damage bonus. Or in the case of the Love Thumper, you're getting amazing shield recharge delay when compared to the Pun-chee, which makes the Love Thumper far easier to use despite its slightly lower roid damage. The only shield that's more like the Pun-chee at this point is the Hide of Terramorphous, which has far higher roid damage in comparison, utterly dwarfing what's available on the Pun-chee. So, while the Pun-chee may have better stats than other roid shields, it falls flat due to both its general inferiority to the Hide of Terramorphous, as well as its generally lousy unique attributes. But, like the Sponge, if you want to waste some Seraph Crystals on it, the Pun-chee is also acquired from the Seraph vendor located in the Badass Crater of Badassitude in Torgue's Campaign of Carnage DLC. Number 6. The Sunshine Shield from Borderlands the Pre-Sequel. Now, competition among Nova Shields is pretty steep. And while I would say that the clear winner for the whole category is the Flame of the Firehawk, you also have to admit that there's some other great choices out there, like the Deadly Bloom, Black Hole, Supernova, and even to a lesser extent, both the Hide of Terramorphous and Avalanche make for some great Nova shields. This brings us to an oddity in the form of the Sunshine, which instead of emitting a giant bubble or wave blast that is guaranteed to hit enemies, you instead emit a number of fire laser bolts in all directions. This could potentially increase the distance you can deal damage at the expense of possibly missing, and for that reason, I think the Sunshine tends to be inferior to other Nova shields. Not to mention that its main competition in the pre-sequel, which is the Supernova, is already known for having significantly improved blast radius if you were ever worried about range in the first place. I guess if you want this shield though, you can always obtain it upon completing the To the Moon side quest mission that started in the Lunar Launching Station. Honestly though, I think you're better off using either the Deadly Bloom, Black Hole, or the Supernova if you're playing Borderlands the pre-sequel. Number 5. The Impaler from Borderlands 2 and the Flying Maiden from Borderlands the pre-sequel. So, both of these are pretty much the same thing, with the primary difference being that the Impaler is from Borderlands 2 and can actually drop in-game from either the Warrior or the Handsome Sorcerer, while the Flying Maiden is from the pre-sequel and can't drop in-game at all. While not quite as bad as conventional spike shields, which are only effective against melee attacks, I do think the Impaler and Flying Maiden are held back by their inability to deploy spikes when hit from ranged attacks that don't involve the use of bullets. Not to mention that the corrosive exclusivity presents some problems, as a significant number of enemies in Borderlands 2 in the pre-sequel aren't vulnerable to corrosive damage. Granted, corrosive vulnerable enemies in both games are definitely present, but more enemies on average are vulnerable to fire damage, or would be better off slagged or frozen to make them much easier to take down. I suppose there's also the fact that the ranged spikes, provided they detonate at a close enough range, can damage the user as well, which is also a problem. But like I said earlier, if you want an Impaler, be sure to farm either the Warrior from the vanilla game or the Handsome Sorcerer from the Dragon Keep DLC. As for the Flying Maiden, you're just gonna have to use Gibbed Editor to get it. Number 4. Captain Blade's Manly Man Shield from Borderlands 2. So, this is one of a few different Captain Blade items that bestows a buff and a curse to the user. In the case of the buff, the Manly Man Shield adds explosive damage to all melee attacks, regardless of whether the shield is depleted or not. However, the curse portion makes the player take increased damage from elemental sources. And if you ask me, it's a combination of both of these that are a problem. As far as the explosive damage applied to melee attacks is concerned, it's not all that high to begin with, especially when compared to roid shields, which are capable of significantly higher damage. The curse effect also presents its own set of issues, as your higher susceptibility to elemental damage makes you just weaker. Maybe this thing would be better if it got rebalanced, but as is, the Manly Man Shield makes for a poor shield. If you want it though, it's acquired by completing the Message in a Bottle side quest mission that's located in Wormwater in the Captain Scarlet DLC. Number 3. The Whiskey-Tango-Foxtrot from Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel. So I think we all know that the Whiskey-Tango-Foxtrot really means worse than failure. In all seriousness though, and given its acronym potential, I think it's pretty easy to say that the developers pretty much knew that the Whiskey-Tango-Foxtrot was awful, if not at least flawed in some way. After all, the point of most booster shields is to restore a player's shields provided that the shield spawns a booster upon taking damage. In the Foxtrot's case, you get these explosive boosters that deploy, which can be really dangerous. While these explosions can certainly damage enemies, they also can risk hurting the player as well. Not to mention that given that this is shock damage and how shields are already quite vulnerable to shock damage, having a shield that emits boosters that can deal shock damage to the player is really bad and can definitely make the Foxtrot more of a liability than an asset. Ultimately, I just recommend that you avoid this one, as there are plenty of other booster shields out there, like the Big Boom Blaster, that are just way better. But I suppose if you insist, this shield generally tends to drop from any suitable loot source in either game. However, for Borderlands 2 in particular, your best bet is to try and farm chubby enemies. Number 2. The Pot of Gold shield from Borderlands 2. This is a shield that's just unbelievably hard to get and not really worth your time once you get it. And this is because the Pot of Gold only drops from an NPC named Peter Zafford during the Clan War End of the Rainbow side quest, which means you're going to have to either dashboard or Alt F4 out of your game in order to get it. And even if you do manage to get your hands on a Pot of Gold, its special effect, which is a chance to drop money upon taking damage, is just lousy. Not only is the percentage chance here so low and to the point that you'll almost never see any money drop, but the amount of money that actually drops is truly insignificant. In fact, you would be better off chest farming or looting random crates to get money than relying on this shield's special effect. It also doesn't help that the stats of the shield itself aren't especially great either, meaning what you're getting here is something that's not only inferior to most shields that you may come across, but even its redeeming qualities or special effect isn't really worth your time either. Ultimately, if you ask me, this is a shield that you're definitely going to want to avoid. And finally, number 1, the Cradle shield from Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel. Without a doubt, the Cradle is the worst shield in the entire series. Despite Borderlands 2 being out for like 6 years at this point, and Borderlands the pre-sequel being out for like 4, the scaling on the Cradle's explosive damage has yet to have been fixed. Granted, I suppose the scaling for the pre-sequel in general is a lot less oppressive than it is in Borderlands 2, and thus, the Cradle isn't quite as bad in the pre-sequel. However, the fact that the Cradle will at best deal about 10% damage to an enemy's shield is pretty awful. The other problem is that the Cradle sports a really low shield capacity and quick recharge, which I suppose would have been great for the Cradle special effect if it worked. However, because it doesn't, the lower shield capacity is more often than not a liability. If you're looking for a shield that hasn't worked properly for years and doesn't even make for a great defensive or offensive shield, then the Cradle is it. So, if you want it, be sure to farm Henry during or after the best Mother's Day ever side quest in the Highlands. Or try your luck and get it to drop from any suitable loot source in Borderlands the pre-sequel. Alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and as always, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.